Welcome to Books and Beyond with That Guy Jay. I am your host, That Guy Jay, and let's just jump into today's watch of the day. Today's watch of the day is the Casio MRW 200H. It's a little bit hard to see here because of the time of day, but right here we have a date window that also tells you the day of the week. So this is a day-date complication. This is a very affordable Casio watch. I believe it comes in right around $20. It is a great daily watch because of the high contrast that makes it super easy to read. It gives you the day and the date, so you always know what's going on there. And yeah, it's just a fantastic looking little watch for under $20. And quickly before we jump into our interview with our special guest today, if you could just take a moment to like, comment, share, subscribe, really hit any of the buttons. It truly goes a long way and it means a lot to me. Thank you so much for the support, and let's get to it. I am joined today by author Marshall J. Moore, who has written the Rites of Resurrection series, I believe is the name. Is that a trilogy?
Yep.
And The Son of a Sailor, which is also a trilogy, correct?
Yes. It didn't start out as one, but it ended up being one.
Yeah. I've read Son of a Sailor. I haven't gotten to the Rites of Resurrection yet, and I need to finish Son of a Sailor. My followers will know this. So I am a serial series starter, so I will get to it, but I want to read everything, so I read a lot of book ones.
Yeah. I feel that intensely. It got to a point where I made a spreadsheet for myself of like the series that I have not finished yet. So I can like check them off as I go along.
Yeah, last year I started counting how many series I was in the middle of, and I got to 20, and I was like, that's enough. I don't need to know more than that. Now, have you always been a writer? Is this something that you've done since childhood, or is it something that you got into later?
Yeah. So I actually learned to read relatively late. My parents were in the military, so we moved around a lot. And first grade, we moved in the middle of the school year. Like spent the that Christmas in a hotel. And the school I moved to had a much more advanced reading program than I did, so I got put into a remedial program, and that sort of like had a weird slingshot effect because. But I had a very patient special ed teacher essentially, who once she unlocked like the joy of reading for me, I just like that was all I did from there on out. So pretty much as soon as I learned how to read for myself, I started, I was always an imaginative kid. Even so, I started making up my own stories and writing them. So it's basically been my entire life. I've been making up stories and writing them down and dabbled a little bit with, some abortive novel attempts in like my teens and high school and college. But finished, I think, the first manuscript, which of course got trunked when I was like 25. And that was 9 years ago now.
So, writing as like a career was something that you always wanted to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I knew there were other things that I was interested in and that I wanted to pursue as a career, but the thought was always, and I'll be writing in the meantime.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I gotcha. Now, you have written quite a few books in a relatively short time period. I'm curious
Yes,
what your writing technique or style is. I
right.
know that famously, I think it was George R. R. Martin that said that the writers are either architects or gardeners. Do you fall into
Mm,
either of those categories?
yes, I'm a big proponent of that descriptor. I am definitely more on the architect side. I like to outline a lot. I like having a firm idea of where the story is going to end up. Sometimes I might be a little bit more nebulous in the midsection, but generally I start with the core story concept, whatever that may be, whether it's character driven or plot driven or world building driven, and then a rough idea of what I want the finale to look like and like the outcome of that, and then kind of I reverse engineer my way back to the beginning of the story, like find where the inciting incident is. So
Right.
definitely much more of an outliner and an architect.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, another thing is your reading taste match up with your writing taste? Like, are you mostly a fantasy reader, or is that just what you prefer writing?
Yeah, I'm definitely very heavy into the general speculative umbrella, sci-fi, fantasy, horror. I read pretty widely in it, and I read pretty voraciously. I like to juggle between different mediums. So at any given time, I'm probably reading like one thing ebook, one thing physical, and listening to an audiobook. I do try and make sure that I am not being exclusively in the genre space because you need to experience like the full breadth of life to be able to have that range of knowledge and experience to really translate that into something that is true to your writing. So I try not to be exclusively SFF, but it is overwhelmingly that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was pretty heavy initially I was a late bloomer when it came to reading. I didn't do a lot of reading when I was a kid or in high school. I was actually in high school thought I was so cool being like, oh, I don't read books. But I started with thrillers in my 20s, and then in my 30s, I got into fantasy through Game of Thrones. And I've always dabbled in sci fi, whether it be television or reading as well. But book talk in the last like 18 months has really broadened my horizons. I've read a whole lot more nonfiction, I've read a lot more romance than I ever thought I would. And it
Right.
really does seem like to have well rounded characters, you would need a little bit of input from everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm
And I
also
mean,
very
there,
much the same. I have an audiobook at night and a physical and an ebook, like at all times.
yeah, exactly. No, like I said, I mostly stick to sci-fi fantasy for my own taste, but like I try and incorporate some other things. Like I've got some good friends who are very into history, so they'll get me like usually some sort of a historical nonfiction for birthdays and Christmas, and that's always a nice little palate cleanser because I do enjoy history and I like learning about like different sort of more obscure eras that maybe we don't come across as much. I try and do like a nonfiction project for each year. Like last year, I read all of Shakespeare, and this year I'm basically picking a poet a month to read like their complete works. So like last month was Maya Angelou for Black History Month, and this month I'm doing John Keats. So trying to just broaden my horizons a bit.
That's a very cool approach. I usually try and read at least one nonfiction a month. Last year, I didn't quite make that. I read more than 12, but it definitely was like months with zero and months with three to catch up.
Yeah, my my reading habits are very dependent on when my library holds through Libby come through. So that's kind of leads to a little more of an eclectic selection than would otherwise be the case.
Mine is very similar to that. What are you currently reading?
Currently, I'm listening to the audiobook of Throne of Jade by Naomi Novik, which is the second in her Temeraire series, which is basically the Hornblower novels, except with dragons, which is fantastic. It's only the second in the series, but I've really enjoyed her style and just that sort of like general world building very much. I'm also about, I want to say 20-ish% of the way through The Heroes by Joe Abercrombie, which is the fifth in the First Law world. And it's a standalone, but it's very much a like gritty, grimdark fantasy deconstruction of like military war stories is like a genre. So I'm really enjoying that one. Anything he reads is really, or anything that Joe Abercrombie writes. I'm a late convert. I came to his first book like last year, but I'm
Yeah, me
very
as well.
easily. He's so good. Like a masterclass in character work, especially when I feel like every writer, if you read them and there's something they do very well, you want to try and take that away and incorporate it in your own work. And for him, he gives us such a good rotating multi POV approach. So you get very acquainted with these characters and like very in their heads and into their interior lives. And then what he does really exceptionally well is that he then shows you that character through someone else's perception, and it's totally different because everyone's view of themselves versus how the world views
Right.
them is completely different. And that's something I would really love to like try and incorporate more in my own stuff when I go back to multi POV.
I think he does grimdark probably better than anyone else I've ever read. Like if I wanted someone to understand what grimdark is, I would probably send them Joe Abercrombie. He really
Absolutely.
has that nailed down.
100%. Yeah, I was very burnt out on like dark fantasy for a while, basically after Game of Thrones, and I picked that up and I was like, oh, okay, I do love this actually.
Yeah, I didn't realize how much I liked fantasy until Game of Thrones. And then after that, I was like, I didn't know what to read. And I found Robin Hobb, which
Mm,
is way different than Game of Thrones, but it ended up on some forum somewhere where people were like, if you liked Game of Thrones, try this.
yeah.
And I really discovered how much I like character work because she does that really well.
Yeah, and I mean George Martin sets you up very well for that as well because like all the rotating POVs and the way he can make you sympathize with people who are just utter bastards is always very appealing. Robin Hobb has been on my list for a long time. I regret to confess I have not read her, but like she's been heavily recommended. I will get to probably the live ship traders at some point sooner rather than later this year.
Yeah, she's honestly fantastic. It's some people have said that her work is boring and that a lot doesn't happen,
Mm-hmm.
and it's for me that's always hard to take because it's like so much happens. It's just it's on a smaller scale. It's very much centered around the characters in their everyday life, and we follow a character from the time that he's literally a boy into young adulthood in the first trilogy. So it's like tons happens. It's just they're not massive plot points. It's but a lot happens in his life.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's like, that's always such a strange critique to level because the scale is what defines the conflict, but that doesn't mean that smaller scale conflicts are any less important than larger scale ones. Like if you extrapolate from like going out of fiction itself, our lives are all relatively small scale, but the things that are going on in my life are important to me. I do care about them, even if they're not going to tip the scales on any wider level. And there's plenty. That's like the heart of story is creating a narrative that will resonate empathetically with the reader.
Yeah, and she's very good at characters. There's a lot of depth to them, and you very much feel for them. And she has no qualms with breaking your heart. She's
As the
very
best
good at
I'll
that.
do.
Now, mentioning Game of Thrones and how we've been waiting 12 or 13 years for the next book, how are you able to get through your writing so quickly? Do you set strict deadlines for yourself? Do you have to write a certain amount every day?
I have a pretty strict word count output. I try and hit 3,000 a day, which is more than some and less than a lot. So it's a rhythm and a pace that generally works for me. It helps that all of my because I'm this isn't the only source of income I have, but all of my other jobs are fairly flexible. The main one is that I am a martial arts coach at a gym, but I also have done like some live theater work and I've substitute taught a bit, and I used to be a film professional, which I've backed away from basically around the time I really started getting into writing. But those are all very like flexible gigs, so I'm usually able to set aside the time to get my 3,000 words a day. Um, and I really had to. These days, I usually am able to, with that pace, effectively put out about two manuscripts a year. Like whether or not those actually get published is up for grabs. But back when the Rights of Resurrection trilogy was first acquired by Shadow Valley Press, the publisher, um, when I pitched it to them, they said they love it, but that they don't do standalones. Can you make it a series? And I said, well, I guess I better. And there was enough meat to dig into from that world building concept and that story that I was able to, during the following year, write the two additional sequels. And since then, I've been able to, it's kind of the like you do a hard thing once you know you can do it again. So I've been able to
Right.
finish two manuscripts a year every year since. Fingers crossed for 2025.
So, what was the process like of getting picked up by a publisher? Do you have a literary agent, or did you just query it yourself to publishers?
So everyone's pathway is non-traditional. I do have an agent now. I signed with Brent Taylor at Triad US in August of last year. The first book in the Rights of Resurrection trilogy, though, came out in 2022. So how that one went was at that point in my journey, I had queried three manuscripts. I want to say at that point, done the whole rigmarole, gotten roundly rejected. I had just finished the first, not the first. I had just finished a finalized draft of the Pale City, the first book in the trilogy, where I felt good about it, and I was ready to start querying. But before I did, I wanted to maybe like do a little more networking within the industry because I'd done the query process and gotten all those rejections and that heartbreak that goes with it three times
Yeah.
already. I wanted to see if I could maybe try a different approach. So I'm based in Atlanta, and Dragon Con is the big convention we have here every year. And so I basically treated it as a extended like continuing education sort of process. So I went to like every writing panel. Like I got to sort of familiarize myself with the guest authors and the guest publishers they had on there. And then when I was in the vendor hall, I went to a couple of their booths, and one of them, Shadow Alley, I asked like, "Hey, are you guys accepting submissions?" And they said, "Yeah, we're actually going to be open until the end of September." So I spent the rest of, and like I told the person that I pitched the book to, and they were like, "Oh, that sounds really cool. Yeah, you should send it in." And so I spent Dragon Con is like Labor Day weekend, so that gave me the entire month of September to like tighten the manuscript as much as I possibly could. I sent it in. It made it past the first round, and then in like I want to say December or January, they messaged back and they were like, "Hey, we do actually really like this. We want to pick you up." And so I signed the contract towards the end of February, I want to say, and yeah, and like I said, they said, "Hey, make it a trilogy." I was like, "All right, I'll do that." Since then, so that's the Rights of Resurrection. That's three books. Wrote the finished editing the first one with their back and forth because publisher,
Right.
and wrote and did that entire process again for the sequels all through 2022. 2023, the beginning of the year rolled around, and my wife and I, in the meantime, had gotten very into book talk, and that was right around when I kind of popped off in my like viral Barnes and Noble video. And we had gotten to know quite a few authors, including several who wrote cozy fantasy. And she was like, "Hey, cozy fantasy is really taking off right now. Do you think you would write one of those?" And I was like, "I don't really know. That's my thing. Like, I'd read Legends and Lattes at that point, and I liked it, but I was like, I don't know if I would actually be able to do something like that." And then like 2 days later, I texted her back and I was like, "Okay, so it's going to be cozy, but it's Jimmy Buffett, and they're all on an island, and they're pirates." And it just kind of took off from there. So that was Son of a Sailor, and then I wrote the second book in that series, Prisoners of the Pirate Queen, also that year, 2023. And then last year, I took some time off, wrote the manuscript, which eventually got my agent, which I can't really talk about at the moment. And then came back to the third book in in the Son of a Sailor series, Enemy of the Empire, and managed to finish that just before the publishing deadline I had set myself in December.
Now, throughout this process, I know a lot of people on Book Talk have decided to go the independent route in terms of publishing. Was that something you ever considered, or were you holding out for more of a traditional publishing situation?
So, like I said, every process is different. I had intentionally decided to like get in touch with publishers directly through for the Rights trilogy, which at the time I hadn't known was going to be the trilogy. So that's how I met up with Shadow Alley, who is now my publisher, because I just went to a con and talked to them in person. And I think that got me a foot in the door that I might not otherwise have had if I had just gone through the querying process again. And then for Son of a Sailor and its sequels, the idea was that since it was going to be pirates, I wanted to get it out by that summer. Like I wanted it to be a beach read, and coming up with the idea in January and getting it out by the end of May is an insanely fast turnaround time. Because you also wanted to like strike while the cozy fantasy demand was high.
Right.
So indie and self pub was really the only option that could permit that amount of speed. But trad publishing has always been the goal for me. Like ever since I was little, I wanted to be in libraries and bookstores and sign with one of the big five and all of that. So I've very happily last year managed to secure an agent, and now I'm sort of in the submissions process with all the trials and travails that entails.
I've read Son of a Sailor, and I started it on the ferry to my hometown, which
Oh,
is an
nice.
island. I figured it was the perfect companion for that week long trip. I read it by my parents' pool while on an
Oh,
island. Now I know
nice.
you're originally from an island as well. I think we're from very
Yes.
different islands. I'm from Nantucket, Massachusetts originally.
Okay, nice. Very cool. Yeah, I am actually from the Marshall Islands. That's a real country. That's why my parents named me that. It's in the Pacific. It is roughly halfway between Hawaii and Asia. It was a Japanese holding in World War II. There was a big battle fought there, or several big battles, a whole campaign actually. And the U.S. took it, and the Marshalls became an independent country in 1989. But we've had a compact of free association with them ever since. And their main source of income actually is that they rent out a military base, or we rent a military base from them, and that's why my family was there, why I was there. So they do a lot of like missile testing. The Bikini Atoll, that's part of the Marshalls. Like, so it's a lot of bombs dropped on a couple of very
Yeah.
small islands.
Yeah, I was in the Navy many years ago, and one of my buddies from my time there is still in, and I believe it was his last deployment, which was 3 or 4 years ago. That's where he ended up for,
Nice.
I think, about a year.
Oh, good for him. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it. So the island I lived on specifically is called Kwajalein, and that's where I lived and grew up and where the main base is. And it's very much just like, and you probably could glean this from the book. It's very small town vibes. It's very like sort of idyllic, Leave It to Beaver style, like, or 1950s like small town, like because there's no one locks their doors. Like there's 1,000 people living there, and you all know everybody, and your parents know you. So like you're very much I had a very like idyllic latchkey kid childhood growing up, just like riding my bike around the island, and that was a spirit I really wanted to bring into Son of a Sailor.
Yeah, you definitely did get that across, and I very much related to that because when I was a kid, Nantucket's changed a lot in the last
Hmm.
15 or so years, but when I was a kid in the 80s, it was, I believe, about 6 or 7 thousand people year round, very small town. But my family's been there since the 1600s,
Nice.
so it was like everybody knew everybody, and my grandparents throughout their entire lives, I don't think they locked their door ever. They would go away on vacation, the door would be unlocked, and and also a lot of the island is protected by like historical codes. So like the
Yeah,
downtown area is still cobblestones from the 1800s, and it
yeah.
very
You've got
the
the
son of a sailor definitely gives off those vibes of like I could picture even in Nantucket, like back when the whaling ships would come in, and
yeah. I was gonna say I read In the Heart of the Sea not too long ago, and there was a good amount of that book that was just about the like what it was like to be a whaler on Nantucket in that time
yeah,
period. Like, yeah, you come from an island with some very cool history to it.
yeah. I mean, for a large portion of the whaling industry, Nantucket was the whaling capital of the world. They
Yeah.
eventually got taken over by New Bedford because of the size of the harbor. It was too shallow for the larger boats to get in.
Mhm.
But yeah, it's an interesting place.
Absolutely.
But island life in general, I think, regardless of what island you're from, other than maybe Manhattan, which is near where I live now. But I think there is something very unique to island life in general, and I think that was a very cool part that came across throughout that first book, and will continue the series, and I imagine there's more of that.
Mhm. Yeah. So I mean, there's definitely like sort of I mean, just by its nature, like an island is insular. Like there's a reason that word comes from that root.
Yeah,
It's that very small community. Everybody knows everybody, which has its pros and cons. I certainly romanticized it a bit within the book because it's cozy and you want to focus on the positive, but there's also the downside of like everybody also knows everybody else's business.
right. Yeah,
Um, but also just the presence of like being so both continually surrounded by and also like economically and climactically affected by the ocean. Like the fact that your livelihood, probably if you live on an island, is in some way, great or small, dependent upon what is the sea like today. What is the weather doing? Whether you're a fisherman or even if you're just like someone who owns a business on an island, like how navigable the waters are is going to affect like whether your shipments can come in or go out.
yeah, absolutely. The When I was in the Navy before I went to my first duty station, I got to go home over Christmas, and we got hit with a really bad snowstorm. And it was like I had to contact the base in Virginia, and I was like, I won't be there on time. And they're like, what do you mean? You have to be. And I was like, I'm on an island. And they're like, take the bridge. I was like, there isn't one. The harbor's closed. There's no planes. It was like I had to go up the chain of command until someone like got it. But it's like the flip side of that is when I was a kid, when there was bad storms, if the harbor would freeze over, it's like you didn't have fresh bread for a week. There was nothing coming into the island.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, and the flip side of that, though, and sort of the silver lining there is that it breeds that sense of like resiliency and self reliance, and also that close knit insular sort of community because
Yeah.
you can't rely solely on yourself. You have to know that your neighbor has your back and that you've got theirs.
Now, having written a cozy trilogy and a more traditional fantasy, do you prefer one over the other in terms of writing style?
I mean, everything's a different challenge and a different enjoyment. I the Rice trilogy is very much. I like to say it's high fantasy wearing an urban fantasy trench coat. Dresden Files is a big influence on me, so it's like it very much has that similar sort of first person detective narrative, kind of a pulpy, very action heavy style. What surprised me when I was writing Son of a Sailor and its sequels is how much I enjoyed writing humor because like that's the Rice trilogy, very dark, very nonstop violence and action and ghosts and necromancy happening. Uh, the ability to sort of slow down and like let the characters kind of bounce off each other and derive humor from that, and for it to be cozy, letting that humor be gentle rather than anything sort of caustic. Uh, that really appealed to me in a way that kind of took me back and surprised me. And so I've definitely tried to incorporate that sense of humor and also sort of that depth of characterization because I think, oddly enough, for me at least, narrating at third person allows me to get a little deeper into a character's psyche and emotional makeup because I can sort of play with where they're acknowledging things to themselves and also refusing to acknowledge things to themselves in a way that's strictly first person. You've kind of read a little bit more between the lines to get.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, probably should have brought this up before, but what would be your elevator pitch for Pale City? Because it's such a cool concept. I really do need to get into that one. I love the sounds of this one.
The so if you want a strict comp, the 2004 Will Smith iRobot movie, but with zombies instead of robots.
Okay.
If you want an actual elevator pitch, retired necromancer tries to solve a string of assassinations in a city where, when everyone dies, their body is repurposed into a zombie servant, and somebody's using those zombies to commit murders.
Yeah, that sounds really good to me. I need to bump that up my TBR.
Yeah, thanks. No, it was a lot of fun to write. It was definitely sort of the one I had on the back burner for a while. I think it took about 3 years, whereas I've said before my average process is like now 2 books a year, and prior to that was like one a year. So
Right.
that was definitely marinating for a while, which I think is why I was able to execute the concept as well as I did.
Now, how did you find the process of working with someone else in terms of editing versus in the past? I would assume you probably did all of the editing yourself when you were trying to query these manuscripts.
I loved it. It's I don't know. There's a level of not even imposter syndrome so much as just it's hard to look at your own work objectively, especially when you're younger, or not even age wise younger, but like when you're a newer writer. When you haven't been doing this for a while, you don't have as firm a grasp of like, am I doing this well? Am I doing this wrong? Um, and by the time and the point in my career where I had sold the Pale City to Shadow Alley and they were going through edits, I had a much better grasp of my own capabilities. But having just another set of expert eyes to like point things out of like from aspects I hadn't really considered, like hey, this might be a plot hole. Hey, this character motivation, this character's not sufficiently motivated to take this action. We need more interiority to drive them for that. Through that, just things where just having someone else who could like look at it and tell you, "Hey, this needs work." The biggest note I had was while I was writing the second book. When I finished it and I had sent it in, the editor ripped it apart because it wasn't anything to do with the actual plot. The plot itself was fine, but the tonally, it was the same as the first book, which is not good because essentially it ignored all the character development that the main
Oh
character
yeah.
had gone through over the course of the first book. And if you pick up the second one and he is mentally and emotionally back in the same place he started, that's a complete turnoff. So I had like a 2 day long existential crisis of oh god, I screwed up so badly. Am I even cut out to do this? And then my wife talked sense into me and catch my butt a little bit, and I was like, okay, that's fine. And so then I went back and I rewrote the whole thing, like keeping all of the plot beats, but just paying that much greater attention to the emotional interiority and making sure that the protagonist's growth from the first book was incorporated in everything that he said and did and thought in the second one. And it worked because the editor came back and was like, you pull that off wonderfully. Like you took all that note and ran with it, and like it's a much stronger book for that. And I agree, it's way better as it is now published than it was after that first draft.
Now, with your future projects, are you going into them knowing that they're going to be series versus standalones, or can you not say?
Um, hmm. I I was kind of trying to write with the intent of standalone with option to series because um, I like to think that anything I write there is at least enough left either in a world building or character or plot point unanswered. Not that I don't wrap up the actual story that I'm telling, but there is enough hanging threads where I could maybe pick them up and string something together out of them, if that makes sense.
Right.
And
Yeah.
sometimes that might be like since I knew I was writing a trilogy for the Pale City, I was able to like leave those very intentionally unresolved plot points to lead into the next book, especially between books 2 and 3, since I had written the first one before I knew I was going to write two more. Um, but like Son of a Sailor, for example, I hadn't really intended for that one to be a series. I just enjoyed it so much that I was like, okay, I like these characters, and the world they inhabit is expansive enough that like, what if I took them and put them in this situation? Like the pitch for the second one is that if the first one is like I said, sort of leave it to Beaver on an island, the second one is Gilligan's Island. Like they all get shipwrecked together with like uh, a rival band of pirates and have to like learn to work together. And so
Oh,
it's
that sounds fun.
allowing, yeah, it was a lot of fun to write. And also like you know, growing up as a kid, like exploring the rest of the islands in the atoll, and just like I had a it allowed me to draw on a lot of that like sort of childhood like let's go see what we can find sense of wonder and adventure. Um, Currently, I'm again saying standalone with option to series, but at this point, it's much more of a dialogue between me and my agent as to like what he thinks will sell for a particular project. And honestly, it's mostly up to, if we pitch it to a publisher, like, are they looking for a standalone or are they looking for a series?
Yeah, it seems like a lot of publishers nowadays are trending towards series. There's a lot of series, which
Yeah.
I'm great with because I think that's why I have trouble finishing series. Is I don't like when
Hmm.
things end. I love to sit in worlds, and it's like I have a couple books that, like the Sword of Kaigen, for example, more so than
Hmm.
any other book, is like I really wish that was a series. Like that
Yeah.
one just being one book is like I want more. I always want more of those, so it's
That
tough.
one is also very high on my TBR because I am a big Kurosawa buff, and every time I mention that, everyone's like, "You should read Sword of Kaigen." I'm like, "I'm gonna get to it."
Yeah,
um,
it's
yeah,
really good. I think that I've seen some recent takes on Book Talk with it where it wasn't what people were expecting, because I think some people went into it expecting that the entire thing was just going to be epic battles, and
mhm.
there are epic battles, but that's kind of not the main thing that's going on, and it
Yeah,
has a pretty big twist at one point that I don't think a lot of people were ready for. But it's not a perfect book, but it's very good. Again,
yeah.
very very strong character work.
I'm definitely looking forward to it when I do get to it. Yeah, I don't know 100% like how accurate this is, but I've heard it said in a lot of the trad circles that like part of the push for series is that like you usually don't really start making back your advance until like the third book in a series, which is why trilogies are so prevalent. And also, there's something to be said for like the natural arc of a story structure lends itself to the sort of 3 act plot. But yeah, it's usually I think a lot of trad authors want series if they can because they're more likely to make back the advance.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense from a business standpoint.
Yeah.
Now, you've done very well on Book Talk. You've had several videos go quite viral. Have you
Yeah.
found Book Talk to be a helpful um, push in sales? Has it helped get the word out about your book the way that you would hope?
Yes, broadly speaking. Now, I'm on a caveat that like it's not 1 to 1. Having the follower count that I do or have had at my peak does not translate to having that many sales. Like, not everyone who follows me is going to buy my book. Not, I think I want to say it's something like I can't even guesstimate what the actual like percentage, but it's way smaller than the number that you see on my follower page.
Yeah,
That said, it's just me out here and also my wife who helps. She comes up with a lot of the ideas. She's a lot more plugged in on Book Talk than I am, or just TikTok in general. So like anytime there's like a meme going around, she's like, "Hey, you should do this." Like she's the brains of the operation. Anytime I'm talking about writing, whether it's actual process or like writing advice or tips or book recommendations, that's all me. But she's the one who's like more attuned to what is currently trending on the platform. So a lot of our more viral things are her brainchild. That said, it's just us. Like for Snob Sailor, especially since that one's self-published, this is all we've got to market it, and it's definitely reached a much wider audience than it would have if I didn't have it as a platform. So I'm grateful to it. Now, what the future of it looks like here in the United States is pretty up for grabs right now.
yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out a way to navigate away from it. I am grateful that I managed to sign with my agent before the current moment because I think I would be a little more desperate to figure out what my alternative was going to be.
Now, I've always wondered, in your opinion, do you think agents and publishers take into account if someone has a social media following versus if they don't? Do you think it's beneficial to have a larger presence?
So I actually do know the answer to this question. It's a pro, but it's not going to make or break the decision to sign with a given author. There are plenty of authors even now who have no or limited social media presence who are still signing and being signed with big reputable agencies who are able to get their book out there. What I understand is the helpful thing is knowing that you for the agency to know there are other ways that you can help build hype. And that doesn't mean necessarily your social media following or the raw numbers, but if you are in community with other authors, if you go to a bunch of conventions regularly, having something where you have shown that you are invested and engaged with the community and with the work beyond just the act of sitting at the keyboard.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Now, have you Have you found that the viral videos had any, not negative consequences, but I have to imagine, because your biggest video that I recall is
Barnes and
the
Noble.
shopping video.
Yeah.
And I have to wonder if like a lot of people end up following and then not even realizing they're following an author and are somehow less interested because they think they're following just a book talker, or
Yeah. I
any
mean, that,
negative side effects like that.
I don't know that I would go so far as negative, but like I was saying earlier, where there's not necessarily a direct correlation between like raw follower count numbers and actual like sales. That's a really good example of it. Cause like when that video took off, I think I just gotten to like the 2 or 3,000 follower mark, something in that range. That was like December of 2022. And then that video got viral and accumulated ultimately like 11 million views. And my follower count shot up by like 20,000 by the end of the week. But those are 20,000 people who saw a cute video of me running around a bookstore to the Benny Hill theme and maybe didn't necessarily interact after that. Now, a lot of them did. Like, I know for a fact that some of my followers who are like have read all my books and are in my Discord and arc read for me are people who encountered me through that video. But that's a very, very small fraction of those 20,000 initial followers. And then I'm sitting somewhere at like 64,000, and like the additional 40,000 I built through that. Maybe they came to me through that, maybe they didn't, but it's through that steady work of like continuing to build the platform. Um, but again, that doesn't mean they're all going to buy my books. It means they just find what I have to say on the internet entertaining, and that's okay. I'm not that. That is another purpose that I serve in their lives. If they're really dedicated and they actually think what I say is valuable and think what I say about my books is interesting, they'll buy. Um, as far as negatives, I wouldn't really say there is any. Any amount of internet notoriety is going to attract some people who just want to be jerks on the internet, and so there have definitely been some comments that I've scrubbed, but that's about the extent of the blowback.
Yeah, and that definitely is a massive part of the internet. I would say, in my experience so far, Book Talk has been way friendlier in general of a community than a lot of other online spaces. Like,
Yeah,
some of the other platforms tend to get really gross in the comments pretty quickly,
yeah,
and
one
like
hundred
very
percent,
often. Not
absolutely.
not to say that it doesn't happen on Book Talk, but I have found at least that it seems to happen less, which I think is a good thing.
Yeah, definitely less. I think the most negative comments, I guess, or like type of comment that I mostly got from that initial viral video are because like the idea was that for Christmas, my wife gave me a 90-second like grab everything you can carry for the Barnes and Noble 50% off hardcover sale for Christmas. That was my Christmas gift, and so we got like a dozen or something books, and that's a few $100s. I mean, it's not extravagant, but it's a reasonable gift for two adults in their 30s to give each other for Christmas.
Oh,
And there were
absolutely.
just yeah, exactly, and there were just so many people in the comments who were like, "She's just spending his money," making the assumption that I'm the breadwinner, and it's like, dude, I have the word author in my byline. She's a CPA. I don't bring in the money.
That's
Check your
such a
assumptions.
terrible stereotype in general, but that was
Yeah,
such a fun idea, and I have
it
seen other
was.
people do it since, and I think that's probably an idea that a lot of people end up on. But that was a really fun one,
Yeah, it was.
and again, you were hitting a 50% off sale, so it's like,
Right. Yeah. Wait. Full
if you're
price, that would have been nuts.
yeah, if you're gonna do something like that, it was the appropriate time, like
Right. Exactly.
a holiday and a sale. You really can't go
Yeah.
wrong.
Exactly. It was that, and like, so it was either complaining that like apparently couples can't give each other gifts because they share finances, which is dumb,
Very
or
weird.
people who were like, you should, because like we made a list of rules because it was a game and games have to have rules, otherwise it's just shopping. But there were so many people who were like, you should just let him buy what he wants, and it's like, then you're just watching me buy books. Like, that's not entertaining.
And buying whatever you want is of course fun, but it was like you had to come up with a strategy, be able to carry the books, like get your way through the store in an efficient way. It was, I mean, I imagine that was a lot of fun for you
Yeah,
too.
not right. Not like she gave me a minute to, or I think 2 minutes to scout, 90 seconds to buy. And every time I bumped into somebody, I would have to subtract a book. I did not subtract any books, but I can't say for certain I wouldn't have bumped into anybody if I hadn't been forefront of the mind there.
Right.
Like any narrative, for there to be tension and thus engagement from the audience, it has to have stakes. And that was the whole purpose of us making it a game with rules instead of just, go buy whatever you want for 90 seconds.
Yeah, and that seems to be a key thing that people overlook in viral videos is there's usually some kind of stakes. That's why people are
Yes.
invested and interested. It's also why some of the horrible content does well, where half your screen is like Subway Surfer and half of is someone's stolen video. Is it's like
Yeah.
there's some type of tension, or a lot of them are. I see a ton of them where it's like them doing masonry work, but just the way that they do it is like you can tell they're trying to build tension with the way that they're doing things or doing it wrong, and it's like there has to be something there for people to be drawn
Yeah.
in.
Exactly.
And that's something people do to exploit it, but I also think that's something people could do in general to help their content is add tension or add something of intrigue.
Yeah.
Now, moving on, the podcast is called Books and Beyond. So, moving into the beyond portion of this, what are some of your biggest interests outside of reading and writing? You mentioned your martial arts instructor. What form of
Hmm.
martial arts?
Muay Thai.
Muay Thai? Very
Yep.
cool.
Yeah. So I've been training since 2013 when I moved to Los Angeles, fresh out of college, to briefly do my starving filmmaker year out there. Did not do a lot of filmmaking, did do a bit of starving, but did pick up Muay Thai while I was out there because it was like, hey, I'm living in a major city. I can actually like pursue martial arts that I wanted to check out since still I'm watching kung fu movies and stuff as a kid. And it was really what kept me sane that whole, long, awkward, uncertain year of being 22 in a new city and not knowing what you're doing. And I maintained it since I moved back to the East Coast and moved to Atlanta, and to the point where now I'm coaching at a gym. I actually just left the gym I'm currently at and am moving to a new one at the start of next month. But that's going to be like very Muay Thai focused, so I'm very excited about it. But I find it's very helpful to me as a writer to have that physical release and to be able to like not only exercise but have a skill that I'm pursuing while doing so. And the fact that it's something that I've been so passionate about for such a long time and have, I hesitate to say expertise, but accumulated enough experience in that I can pass it on to other people is really fulfilling and rewarding.
Yep. Martial arts is kind of cool in that way where you can become very good, but you're never an expert in the sense that you know everything. There's always room for improvement within martial arts.
Yeah, absolutely. There's also a surprising amount of crossover with authors. There was a panel last Dragon Con I was at where like, uh, it, I don't think it wasn't remotely related to like fight scenes or anything, but like when they were doing the introductions, like one of them was like, "Oh, and I'm a karate instructor," and then one of them was like, "Oh, I do MMA," and then like it was like 5 out of the 6 panelists were all martial artists of some degree, and I was just like, "This is there's a lot of correlation here."
That's very interesting. I did martial arts when I was a kid and through my 20s. I did in when I was in Nantucket in my early 20s. The only real option was Krav Maga, which was actually pretty fun. And then once I left the island, I did like American Kempo karate and then
Nice.
transitioned to jujitsu.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, the jujitsu is huge. I feel like I don't have the IQ to do it. There's just so much like bodily positioning where I'm like, hitting someone with your leg or your fist is pretty straightforward. Grappling is another level.
Yeah, grappling is a whole different kind of cardio too. It's like I thought I was in pretty good shape when I first started it, and I was like, "Oh boy, no!" 30 seconds in, and I'm
Yeah,
gassing. It's like it's way different.
absolutely.
I think it was the book Combat Codes potentially,
Hmm.
where I heard someone on a podcast talking about it, where apparently the author is heavily into jujitsu, and the person in the podcast trains jujitsu as well. And they're like, "Oh no, you can tell like every fight scene, it's like everything body position wise perfectly makes sense for what you would really do." And apparently, really elevated the fight scenes in that book.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely have incorporated my experience with Muay Thai and sparring into how I write my fight scenes because it goes back to like the whole write what you know. That's very it feels limiting, but like if you were able to incorporate some aspect of like something you are expertise in, and then that can lend verisimilitude to the book is by showing that knowledge and that expertise on the
Yeah,
page.
that makes a lot of sense. So outside of that, do you have any special passions or interests that
Uh,
take up your time?
I read a lot. I travel a lot. Uh, I recently took up mini painting, like Warhammer and stuff, about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago at this point.
Oh, that's very cool.
Um, yeah, it very. My wife walked over to my like little workstation the other day, and she's like, "So this is what a hyperfixation looks like in real time." I was like, "Okay, rude but true." Yeah, no, I really I've been interested in like the lore and setting of Warhammer 40,000 for like a few years at that point, and finally I wandered into a game store and took the plunge and like painted up my first batch of minis and was like, oh, this is relaxing. This is dangerously relaxing. And so now it's kind of one of my nightly rituals is a few nights a weekend or a few nights a week I'll just plug in the audiobook and get to painting.
It's something I figured out recently is that I really enjoy doing something while listening to an audiobook because I do think I have quite a bit of ADHD going. And I can't just sit and listen. So I either immersive read to keep my focused, or I found that playing kind of simple video games,
Mm-hmm.
or recently I've discovered Legos. I haven't done Legos in many
Yeah.
years.
Oh
That's a
man.
great way to keep my hands busy while I'm listening to an audiobook.
Yeah. No,
Warhammer's
I would.
always been interesting to me. There's a ton of lore,
Mhm.
but that one seems a bit expensive to dive into.
Yeah. I mean, the justification is that basically like I use I still play a lot of video games. I'm still pretty heavy into it, but like an average kit is probably about the cost of like a new AAA game, maybe a little less, honestly, since games are creeping up in prices these days. And like,
Yeah.
I'm certainly not buying, new games all the time. I don't know, I found there's like Facebook Marketplace is something I've utilized pretty heavily to like get them at more of a discounted price. And,
Yeah, I imagine a lot
it's,
of people jump into it and then get out of it.
yeah, definitely. So yeah, it's like any other hobby. Like yeah, there's an entry cost, and there's nothing is free, time wise or monetarily. But it's letting me scratch that similar itch, honestly, to like where writing and martial arts are, where it's a new skill that I'm developing. I'm learning better about color composition and the fine motor skill, brush control, and sort of the patience involved in taking a long time to turn something from a hunk of gray plastic to something that's actually like completed. And also like your relationship with an art of any kind changes once you start monetizing it. And that's not to say I don't love writing or that I don't love Muay Thai. Those are two of my great passions. I'm always going to cherish them and value them and take great joy in them. But part of the reason I picked up the miniature painting is because I realized that I needed something else that was just for me rather than something that I am trying to put out into the world.
Yeah, that was my podcast. I had a solo podcast. I think it was 2 weeks ago, and that's what I was discussing is has like hustle culture and this constant pressure to monetize everything killed a lot of hobbies. And I think
Right.
for a lot of people it has is, I use the example of 10 years ago I was pretty heavily into photography, and
Mm-hmm.
it seemed like everybody in my life, even just like casual acquaintances, are like, "Oh, well, when are you going to make that your side hustle?" And it's like, hopefully never. Like the goal is
Yeah.
for this to just be fun. Like
Right.
I'm not interested in shooting weddings, and that's mostly where the money is in photography for the average person. And it's just like, no, I like to go walk around Manhattan and take pictures of cool things. Like,
Yeah. Which is
and it's
awesome. And like, if you start making it into its own something that has weight and expectation and obligation behind it, then it's no longer just for you. It's something that you're obligated to do rather than that you're doing for the joy of it.
yeah, it's when I was a kid, my dad, he had a gas station and he fixed cars, and he turned the garage bay into a fishing tackle store. And fishing, it being from an island, fishing is his biggest hobby.
Oh yeah,
And
my dad
he
too.
told he told me later, and he was like, it was fun for a while, but I realized that I instead of fishing, I was talking to other people about them going fishing. And it's like he's like it was great and all, but he's like I just wanted to go fishing. It was like him and his business partner ran it for quite a few years, but they got out of it, and they were like, yeah, this is like the quickest way to kill a hobby is to make it your job.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not like I said. I still love the things I do. I wouldn't be pursuing them if I wasn't passionate about them in the first place.
Yeah.
Um, but it's also important to have things that are not part of that hustle culture and are not that you can just do for yourself.
Yeah, and then
Um,
there's certain things that you want to be your career, and I think it's perfectly fine to pursue that. But not every hobby has to have a financial gain for you. It's okay to
yeah,
spend money and not get any back. it's okay to do
Exactly.
something just because it's fun.
Right. And one of the important points to both having a hobby and also if you choose to turn your passion into a career is that all those are venues for forming relationships and forming community. And some of them can lead naturally to another. Like I actually got into the Warhammer and mini painting because one of my Muay Thai students was into that stuff, and at that point I kind of had an interest, and so he like showed me his models, and I was like, okay, I'm going to take the plunge.
Yeah.
And like he and I are still good buddies, and I actually went to a big like miniature painting expo with him like a few weekends ago. And that's something that I probably wouldn't have gotten into or gotten to experience and sort of see all these really cool, awesome works of art if I hadn't met this person through another one of my passions that I had managed to communicate into something that other people can engage in and enjoy. And it's the same way with writing as well. Like every part of your life is going to feed into and bleed into every other part. So make sure that there is a lot of things that are good for you, that are good for your social growth and for forming community and for pursuing an art. And you're going to find people drawn to that, and in turn, find people who are really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think community, that's something I talk about on this podcast a lot. Is 8 years ago, I injured my ankle, and I'm left with a chronic pain condition. So
Oof.
I'm home a lot more than I used to be, pretty much always. So I have found community online, which is something I never really tried before. And Book Talk has been a huge part of opening my eyes to how much you can make these connections with people online. But it's like I've been getting into new hobbies the last couple years, and like I got into watches, and I found out that there was a watch expo in Manhattan. I think it was in November, and I went to that, and I was like, oh, there's tens of thousands of like watch nerds like me, like all
Yeah.
here just like to talk to manufacturers, look at things, and put our fingers on actual watches instead of pictures. And it's really cool as you dive into all of these sub hobbies that there's a community for just about everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, that's how you meet people.
Yeah,
Like, you find people with the same interests as you, and that's the building block of what can, in a lot of cases, lead to being long lasting and meaningful and important friendships. Emily Krempholtz, she's on TikTok as at Writers of Rohan. You've probably seen her. She's got like various colored hair and gives like really excellent writing advice. She and I met through the app, and we started a little writing Discord with some other authors who are on there. And like she's since like slept at my place. Her and her partner, like they're good friends of ours, and like we've done conventions together. She signed with what her agent a few months before I eventually signed with that same agent. And I don't know that I necessarily would have thought to query him if she hadn't had such a, glowing experience of going through that same process. So like that, it's just one instance of like how literally Book Talk and, having that online relationship can evolve into something much more important and meaningful in real life.
yeah, absolutely. And I think Book Talk has been, I think it's done that for a lot of people in a lot of different ways. And it's Book Talk is in theory like a small corner of the internet, and then there's even you can keep niching it down. There's even smaller corners of Book Talk, and like it's really interesting because I feel like I'm in a couple different spaces in terms of genres.
Mhm.
But it's such a fun way to meet people, and I'm happy to see reading making a comeback because I really do think that it's becoming more popular than 10, 15 years ago, more
Yeah.
publicly like accepted, and not being. I mean, there's still some people that question how you read so many books in a year, and it's like, well,
Mhm.
I don't watch a lot of TV. Like
Audiobooks count.
they definitely do.
Yeah.
They definitely do. I've had to convert a couple people I know in my life to believing it, but it's absolutely the case.
Yeah. My my favorite is getting to like the audiobook loan checks out for me for something I already own the physical copy of, so I'm just like swapping between them, like washing dishes, reading book, back to doing chores, reading book.
Yeah, I do a ton of that as well, and it's like my TBR now is fully. I would consider myself a mood reader, but it's now just 100% determined on like what becomes available on Libby or Hoopla. It's
Yeah,
like when I get the
exactly.
notification, it's like, well, I guess I'm reading that next.
Yeah, this is my next several days.
Yeah, and I try to do a lot of with the immersive reading. That's been really good for me as well because my mind does tend to wander if I'm just doing one or the other.
Yeah.
So like
I
when I do both, I can really lock in, and like my comprehension's better, my speed is better. Not that
Hmm.
it's a race, but it's like without trying, I'm reading faster and
Right.
understanding more. So it's like this is a win. And
Yeah.
that's actually something I learned from Book Talk is I never would have. I don't know why I wouldn't have thought to do that. I wouldn't have thought to put on an audiobook and pick up the physical book.
Yeah. That's I haven't really done that. I don't know. It's there's something different about the sensory processing. I think it's just because I read faster than I can auditorily process, and I still listen to the audio at double speed. So like, um,
Yeah, I've had to up my it depending on the narrator. I've ended up sometimes at 3x because I read pretty fast as well. So it's like if it's not synced up perfectly, I'll read ahead, and then hearing 5 words behind where I am just messes me up. So it's like I have to get them in
right.
sync.
Yeah, that makes
But
sense.
it's been pretty helpful.
Cool.
Now, before we wrap up, any last information you'd like to give about your books? Where can people find them? Where's best for them to be purchased? I always wonder, is it better to buy directly from you, or is Amazon still work for you?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm Marshall J. Moore, author, most places. That's my TikTok and Instagram handle. You can find me on Blue Sky, Marshall J. Moore. The J's important. There is another Marshall Moore author out there, so sometimes we will occasionally get confused for one another. Um, but yeah, I'm also on Threads a little bit. I'm trying to be more active at posting on Blue Sky. I was never like a Twitter person, so it's I'm the vibes are much better there, even pre garbage fire TikTok or garbage fire Twitter.
Oh yeah,
um, but I'm trying to train myself into like actually posting because that's where people are now. As far as getting my books, oh right, I also have a website marshalljmoore.com. Again, the J is important. Um, Buying books, I'm always going to tell people it's like whatever is best for you. If you want to talk like purely monetarily, I have a TikTok shop account where all 6 of my currently published books are available, and that like comes directly to me. I will sign them. If you want me to personalize them, leave a note in the order, and I will personalize them. Otherwise, you're just getting my generic signature. But I'll like put a sticker in them, and I'll wrap them up and seal them with a wax seal and send them out. So that's the best return on investment for me, and also a fun little way to make it a little more special for the reader.
yeah,
But again, whatever way is best for you is always going to be my answer, because ultimately it's more important to me that you read my work and that something in it resonates with you than how you get it in the first place.
yeah. That makes sense. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you giving us a little bit of your time.
Absolutely. I was happy to be here. It was a pleasure.
All right. And thank you, everyone, for joining me again this week and taking a little bit of your time out of your week to hang out with me. If you could give a quick like or subscribe, it would go a long way. Thank you so much, guys, and I will see you next week.